Hey everybody, this is Refresh, and I'm here to report on my first War of the Spark draft for Magic the Gathering. These are all the cards I drafted in my very first pack. Pick 1 was Ilharg, the Raise Boar, which got me definitely wanting to look for red cards, and there were some good red cards coming my way. At first, I actually experimented with going red and black as well as green, but the black dried up pretty quickly and I was able to pick up some decent blue cards. In my pack 2 pick 1, I took Commence the Endgame because it seemed pretty strong. From there, I thought I was going to be in red and blue, so I kind of forced it, and I saw some spells payoffs like Saheeli, Sublime Artificer, Invade the City, and Cyclops Electromancer. So I kind of went that way, drafting a lot of removal and basically going for a spells deck. But in this, I think I made a mistake because there were a lot of great green cards being passed around, and I think I would have done much better had I gone green instead of blue, even with Commence the Endgame. From what I can tell from this set, this is kind of a bomb-heavy, bomb-focused set, and so you pretty much want to follow your bombs in as much as you can, and Ilharg was clearly a creature that I wanted to cast often because it's hard to remove and it can get some good value, especially if you're able to put in creatures that have good enter the battlefield effects. So this is the deck that I eventually built. It is very much a blue-red spells deck. I don't have a ton in the way of payoffs, unfortunately. The biggest payoffs being Saheeli, Sublime Artificer, Invade the City, and Cyclops Electromancer. But I do have a lot of removal in the 2-drop section with 2 Jaya's Greetings and a Chandra's Triumph. And I have a good amount of card advantage thanks to the Commence the Endgame, the Jace's Triumph, Timio's Epiphany. Even Fibblethup is kind of a free card draw. And so the hope of this deck was to kind of deal with the inexpensive creatures with the removal down here, and then hope to draw into Ilharg, or get a large enough amassed zombie between the Relentless Advance, the Eternal Skylord, and Invade the City. Either going tall or going wide with Saheeli by getting value by casting all these spells that I have. I also decided to throw in 2 Emergence Zones in addition to the 8 mountains and 7 islands that I put into this deck, mostly because I don't think it hurts my deck too much to have a couple of these, and it lets me cast some of these creatures and spells as instants, which would give me a little bit more flexibility. How did it work? Well, let me tell you. In match 1, game 1, I got royally mana screwed and was stuck on 2 lands after keeping a 2-lander for multiple turns, while my opponent was able to play lands and play creatures off of his lands and then proliferate like crazy onto those creatures, making them so big that my burn was not able to take care of them, and I wasn't able to draw enough lands to play enough creatures to do much about it. So even when I was able to play creatures, they were pretty much all in chump block mode because I had lost so much life at that point. And so I lost the first game handily. In the second game against the Simic deck, I had to take a mulligan to 6 because I drew a hand with 2 little mana. I kept my second hand with 2 lands in it, and I managed to scry a land to the top. And so I thought I might have something going here. Unfortunately, again, I didn't draw any of the removal that I had early on, and so my opponent was playing creatures and then just pumping them up with Proliferate like crazy, making them too big for me to deal with. And then by the time I was able to start playing creatures, everything was on chump duty. And eventually, as I was working towards defending myself, I started just drawing lands, and so there wasn't really much else I could do. I had lost so much life from the start, not being able to profitably block anything that he was attacking with, and so I ran out of gas once the land started coming, and I lost pretty promptly. And so I ended the first match with 0-2 and went into my second. My second match was up against a Selesnya deck, and in our first game, this opponent was also on the Proliferate plan, and unfortunately I was unable to really draw much in the way of my removal. For a spells deck, I drew primarily my creatures and ended up having my creatures outclassed by his pretty quickly as they got counters and more counters. And so I lost that one after being a little stable at first, but once he started pouring the counters on his creatures, there wasn't really much I could do without being able to remove the creatures or deal with them in single combat. In the second game, my opponent mulliganed to 5, unfortunately, and he kept a hand that didn't even have any lands in it. He was able to scry a force to the top, but in the entire game he was only able to play 2 lands total, and I just pressed the advantage and took him out before he was able to do anything. It didn't feel good. It didn't feel like a fun game, but that was something that happens in Magic, not only to me, but also to my opponents. This was pretty much the story for our third game as well. He didn't mulligan this time, and so he actually had an okay start with 2 lands, and he wasn't able to draw his third land for a long time. And so in that time I managed to get a massive board and life advantage, and eventually did him in as soon as he started being able to cast his creatures. I removed him and just went in for the win. So that was that. I won the second match 2-1, but entirely off of Mana Screw, which didn't make me feel very good about my deck. My third match was against a Jeskai player. In our first match, we both took a mulligan to 6 and kept our respective hands, and then it was a pretty good fight for a good long time. That is until turn 6, my opponent played God Eternal Ketra. And from there I could see the writing on the wall, especially as I was drawing more lands and not spells, and my opponent was able to play 2 creatures a turn after he played Oketra, and his board just got enormous. I could see that there was no way I was going to win. And so I conceded that game, and we went on to our second game. In our second game, my opponent got stuck with just 3 lands, and so there really wasn't much he was able to do. Even by the time he got his 4th land, he wasn't really able to cast a lot of his spells. He did have Oketra in his hand, but not able to play it. He was just stuck chumping with his creatures against my ever-increasing board, and seeing that he might be casting Oketra anytime soon, I just pressed the advantage as fast as I could and took him out with relative quickness. In our third game, I drew a hand with 6 lands in it and mulliganed that to 6. My opponent kept his hand, and despite the fact that he pretty much only had 3 lands for the majority of the game, he was able to play a Grateful Apparition and then throw a counter on it from his Iron Bully, and I was not able to draw any removal for that Grateful Apparition. Not a single burn spell, not a single totally lost, no way of getting it off the battlefield. And by the time I was able to find my 1 reach creature, it had already grown to be a 5/5, and so even my Turret Ogre was on chump duty, and I pretty much could do nothing about it. I had the ground locked up because I had a better board on the ground, but his flyer just flew over my entire ground, and so even with just 3 lands, and eventually a 4th, but it didn't matter, my opponent was able to remove all my flying blockers and finish me off with relative ease with just 3 lands because he had 1 flyer that I couldn't deal with. And that was that. So I ended up losing my third match, 1-2, and for all my effort, the store was giving away these Bolas's Citadel promos to everybody who was playing, and so I got this at the very least and was able to walk away with something special. It is unfortunate though that 5 of the 8 games that I played had some level of mana screwing or mana flooding going on. And again, this is not indicative of War of the Spark in particular, but it's just something that happens in Magic, and it's not really fun to have the majority of your games determined by that, and yet that's what happened. So far my experience with War of the Spark hasn't been especially positive. Let me know how your drafts went this last weekend if you were able to go. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more such videos, hit subscribe. This is Refresh, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.